Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Chopin's major piano works, all of them. We're going to do an ideal list of all of the most important Chopin piano works with different pianists for each clump of works. I suppose I could find 24 different pianists to do the 24 preludes, one to each prelude, but that wouldn't be terribly practical, would it? Especially if you want to get just the preludes. So we're going to have one pianist for the Ballades, the Scherzos, the Preludes, the Mazurkas, the Etudes, the Waltzes, the Nocturnes, you name it. This is all solo piano music. The concertos we'll do separately. They deserve a talk on their own, I think. So we'll do those independently, but this is the solo piano music. Now, this has taken me a long time to come to grips with, not because I didn't know what performances I want to include, but because there's just so much. Everybody loves Chopin. Everybody. He's absolutely one of the most remarkable composers of the 19th century, not just in his specialization in the piano or the comparatively small amount of music he wrote, but also the nature of that music. It's so bloody beautiful. It's like painfully beautiful. His music is the ultimate test in some ways of a pianist's touch and tone and virtuosity and taste. Taste is a biggie. And because, on the one hand, you cannot play his music metronomically. It's impossible. You can't just be cool and mechanical or come scritto, exactly as written in the score. He demands that you employ rubato, that flexibility of tempo, and that you can fiddle a little bit with the text here and there. You can break chords. You can add octaves if you feel like it once in a while. It's almost improvisational music, but only so much because, Chopin himself was extremely meticulous and a real jerk as a human being, basically. He was a nice sort of family guy, but he hated all other composers. He didn't like any music except his own, basically. He was a difficult person, let's put it that way. He was a character, and his music is as personal as music gets, but it encourages the artist to make it personal to them. And it's really special. It's just incredibly special stuff. And every pianist in the universe plays Chopin. Some of them play Chopin miserably, but they all play Chopin. And that means that for these iconic works, there are so many performances and so many excellent performances. You'll have your own, I know, and you can come up with your own ideal list if you like. That would kind of be interesting. But you've got to follow the same format that I follow in making up your list. No repeats, different pianists for each set of works, and see how far you get. And there's, oh my goodness, what have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about a dozen different sets of pieces or individual pieces that we're going to talk about. And let's start. We're going to start with the piano sonatas, numbers 2 and 3 only, because nobody likes number 1. It doesn't matter. And in my set here, I've managed to include some of the individual shorter works or singleton works that you don't find too often. So for piano sonata number 2, my choice, and everyone has recorded, piano sonata number 2, it's the one with the funeral march. Bum, bum, ba-da, da, 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 da. Everyone knows that funeral march, even if they don't know it's by Chopin. It's been used in everything from like Roadrunner cartoons to state funerals for Eastern European despots blasted out by brass bands. It's the funeral march, isn't it? So my choice for the second sonata is Ashkenazi. And I know that there are others that are more famous, but Ashkenazi is a great Chopin player. And I think his second sonata is marvelous, particularly for the first movement. The first movement has that palpitating neurotic theme. Ba-dum, ba-da-dum, da-da, da-da-da, da-da, da-da-da, da-dum, ba-da-dum. He brings a certain rhythm to the left hand and an articulation to the rhythm that I think is really almost unmatched by anybody else. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance. And so I go for Ashkenazi. And the other reason I go for Ashkenazi, like I said, is that there is a twofer that has all three sonatas, which are marvelous performances, and you can get sonata number 1 if that's what you want. If you want to hear it, it's on here. Very few other pianists have done sonata number 1. I think Leifo Vajansnes did sonata number 1 on Virgin. That was also a very good record. But Ashkenazi on Decca for sonata number 2. Sonata number 3, Argerich. Oh, Argerich. This is early Argerich. This is her first major recording. In fact, after she did this EMI disc, she switched to DG, and she redid all the same stuff. But this was fresh, young, remarkable Martha Argerich doing the third sonata, and it is an extraordinary disc. You also get, 3 Mazurkas, opus 59, the Nocturne in F, opus 15, number 1, the Scherzo in C sharp minor. Scherzos are great too that she does, and the Polonaise in A flat. Ooh, the Polonaise A flat, opus 53, which is a knockout. So if you're, the temptation is to get like an Argerich box on DG or something like that. But this is Argerich in her absolute. She's always been at her prime, hasn't she? Practically. She doesn't always play well, but she hasn't exactly diminished in capacity as the years have worn on, has she? She's only limited her repertoire and made too many recordings of the same stuff, like so many people we know. But this was before any of that happened. When was this recorded? In the 60s or something, wasn't it? Wait a minute. Yeah, 1965. Wow. Aren't we getting old? Argerich, sonata number 3. Now, the Etudes. Oh, God, don't we all love the Etudes? They're so marvelous. Donald Francis Tovey wrote a fabulous, fabulous essay on the Chopin Etudes. He basically said that there are no Etudes other than Chopin's after Bach, because they embody the same principle, which is they are simultaneously Etudes. That is, they test individual aspects of technique, but they are also absolutely perfect works of art. And that is something special. Of course, Tovey hated Liszt, so that doesn't quite count. But, so you might look askance at some of those things. And, of course, there have been many. I mean, there's the Debussy Etudes. There are lots of Etudes. But Chopin's Etudes really are unbelievable pieces. And my choice is Earl Wild on Ivory Classics. I mean, Earl Wild's Etudes, actually, this original disc was on Chesky, and it may still be on Chesky, or it may be on Ivory Classics now. I'm not sure where it wound up, but Earl Wild was he was a romantic icon in this kind of music. He could play it with just the right, improvisatory freedom, allied to virtuosity, but also taste. He was a true romantic. He could do what he wanted and make you believe it was right, and you never questioned his choices in the way you do other people's sometimes. So for the Etudes, I go with Earl Wild. Then we have the Preludes. The Preludes. Oh, the Preludes are so beautiful. They're so, so beautiful, the 24 Preludes. And they work wonderfully well, actually, as a set. If you play all 24 of them, it lasts about 40 minutes, which is the length of a symphony. And, they're only they range from a few seconds to a couple of minutes each. And really, really, they are extraordinary pieces. I think it's fascinating. Many, many great pianists, very great pianists, never recorded all of them. And, they just did individual preludes, like Richter and people like that. They did bits of them. And so it's really, I like to hear the whole set when I want to hear any of them, because I just think they're so beautiful. And I think there's such a well-planned scheme of contrasts between them. So for the Preludes, I chose Moravec. Yay, Ivan Moravec. Now, Moravec recorded them twice. This is the recording that was originally Connoisseur Society. It's now on VAI, and it is absolutely spectacular. He also did them for Superfun, and that probably will be reissued because there's a Moravec box coming up. So a big box of most of his Superfun and other recordings. I mean, his Chopin was just to die for. And he was a very selective pianist in terms of repertoire, but he did do the Scherzos, he did the Ballades, he did the Preludes, and he did the Nocturnes, which we'll come to anon. We'll talk about that momentarily. This particular disc, the cover's over here, there it is, contains the Preludes, the Scherzo number 1, the Barcarolle in F sharp major. I love the Barcarolle. But here's the thing with Chopin, we love all of it, don't we? And the Etude in C sharp minor, opus 25, number 7. We all love everything that Chopin wrote. I mean, actually, I don't think I've ever come across anyone who doesn't like Chopin. Well, maybe one very weird person doesn't like Chopin, but even people who don't particularly appreciate piano repertoire, keyboard repertoire, they all have some Chopin. You have to. It's like life isn't complete unless you have some Chopin. It's that simple. Okay, the waltzes. Now, the waltzes, you get the minute waltz, which remember like when we were like, snotty little kids and everyone said, oh, it's the minute waltz, and some jerk would come up to you and say, it's not minute, it's minute. He meant little, the petite waltz, not that it's supposed to take a minute or that you have to play it in a minute. I mean, isn't it more fun? Isn't it just more fun if we call it the minute waltz? Even if it takes longer than a minute to play, which it really does. I suppose you could do it in a minute, but that would sound sort of frantic, don't you think? The waltzes are famous, and the most famous performance, which is the one I picked just because I think we have to, is Dino Lipati. Yes, Lipati. Actually, there's 2 versions of the waltzes in here. There's like one of 13, one of 14 of them. They are absolutely sui generis. This was the ultimate recording of the waltzes, the reference recording, ever since it was first released. And even though it's in mono, it's fantastic. It's perfectly, wonderfully listenable. The sound is good. And Lipati was he died of leukemia. He was very young, tragically young, and he was one of those artists who I think. What could you say about him? He was extraordinary. And it's very interesting. He had in his piano playing a lot of the same characteristics that make, for example, Constantine Silvestri such a wonderful conductor. Maybe it's sort of a Romanian thing. I don't know. But it's that ability to breathe life, to sing, to make the instrument sing, to phrase in a way that is so instantly communicative and that has this remarkable warmth. And it's even more amazing in a sense to do it on a piano, because a piano, it doesn't have the same coloristic possibilities as the orchestra, and particularly not the vocal character of string instruments. But Lipati could do it. And that's why his piano recordings are so extraordinary. And I think that his Chopin waltzes it's one of those things that, you can't have Chopin in your collection unless you have Dino Lipati doing the Chopin waltzes. And this box is a 7-disc set. It's everything that he did for EMI. I mean, there's live stuff floating around out there at some place, but these are all of his EMI recordings. And even if you can't get the waltzes separately anymore, you should have this set. It's just an important set in the history of keyboardosity. So, Dino Lipati for the waltzes. Now we come to the Polonaises. Actually, I had a friend who was a tremendous pianist when I was in college, and he was a Juilliard pianist and all that, and he always played that Polonaise, and he always said the ba-da-da-dum-bum was similar to the March to the Scaffold in the Symphonie Fantastique. It was the bloody head rolling off the scaffold after being guillotined. I'm not sure if that's true, but it made one heck of a good story, and the way he played it was quite convincing in persuading us that there was a true revolutionary undercurrent to that music. Anyway, for the Polonaises, I chose, because, I haven't talked about him at all. I haven't chosen him for anything yet, and some of you have yelled at me for it. Polini! Again, this is somewhat early Polini. As he's gotten older, I find him less persuasive. His tone has hardened, his approach has become more rigid, and I think that at this point in his career, he was always a little bit cool emotionally, but here, the combination of virtuosity and precision and, yes, passion is really pretty remarkable. This is just an amazing set. It's always been one of the reference recordings, not just for the Polonaises, but also for the Preludes and the Etudes. And the sonnets were always a little hard-toned, but perfectly listenable. There's nothing wrong with it. And I'm happy to be able to include some Polini in one of these talks, because he is, of course, one of the great pianists of the 20th century, and an amazing artist, and an artist of great intelligence and thoughtfulness, and so the fact that I haven't mentioned him till now doesn't mean I don't like him. I have his complete Beethoven sonatas. In fact, I think, are they right? Yeah, see, look at this. I don't even have to go very far to get them. See, here they are, Polini's Beethoven sonatas. And I also have his Chopin box here, and there's a separate Chopin box somewhere around here. It's wherever it is. But, I just want you to know that I do like Polini very much, and selectively, but I respect him enormously, and his Chopin Polonaises are tremendous. Now we come to the Mazurkas. Now, the obvious choice for the Mazurkas would probably be Rubinstein. His set of Chopin Mazurkas for RCA, the stereo set, has been the reference recording since he made it. That's why I didn't pick Rubinstein, because I'm going to leave him for you guys. If some of you want to pick Rubinstein, I chose in consultation, not direct consultation, in written consultation, because he reviewed them for us at ClassicsToday.com with Jed Disler, our piano maven. We've talked about Chopin. You have to. He's a piano maven. I love piano music, but I'm not the expert he is. And, so we talk about piano repertoire all the time, and he has largely formed my taste. Thank you, Jed. You have my undying gratitude. And in the Mazurkas, he turned me on to a set which I never would have paid any attention to previously. I just wouldn't have, because it never came my way as a critic, and I had other things to do. Garrick Olson. Now, Garrick Olson did the complete Chopin piano music. It's now on Hyperion. Originally, it was on Arabesque. And I remember when it was on Arabesque, and then all of a sudden this box popped up on Hyperion. I said, I wonder if that's Arabesque. It is. And Garrick Olson is another absolutely first-class Chopin performer. He plays the music as if to the manner born. It's a terribly, terribly underrated cycle. People just don't talk about it, and it deserves to be discussed and listened to. And he is magnificent, absolutely magnificent in the Mazurkas. So, I much as I love Rubinstein, I think that this set of the Chopin Mazurkas is really, really special. And like I said, it's on Hyperion. It's in the big box. I don't know if you can get it separately, but Garrick Olson is a major Chopin interpreter. And thank you, Jed, for turning me on to this, the Mazurkas. Oh, yeah. And the Mazurkas, let me just say before we go on, the Mazurkas are in some ways the most elusive set of Chopin's works. There's a lot of them, first of all. How many are there? There's like 60 of them, or let's see, there's 50-something. 50 some odd Mazurkas. There's a lot of Mazurkas. And, Mazurkas are all tiny little waltz-like dances in 3/8 time. They can have different rhythms. They can be, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can accent them differently. But they contain some of Chopin's most amazing harmonic invention, some of his most strange and elusive and haunting melodic invention. At times they sound almost as forward, looking as Bartók. They're dances, they're folk dances, essentially, and they are his distillation of that Polish ethos that meant so much to him, even more in some ways than the Polonaises are. And they're short. They're these little aphoristic pieces, most of them. And so, they may not strike you as all that individual all at once, but listen to them in groups, in small sections. I wouldn't play big chunks of them at once because the rhythm gets to be too similar. They're tiny, tiny, small scale pieces. But what a world of music they open up, and something that no one else has really done, or no one had done before Chopin did it. And they're extraordinary. And so Garrick Olson on Hyperion for the Mazurkas. Now we come to the Scherzos, the 4 Scherzos. Oh, these are such cool pieces. They really are. Chopin was, I believe, the first ever composer in the history of the universe to write freestanding, that's the word, to write freestanding scherzos. Scherzi is the plural in Italian. Scherzo, of course, means joke, and these were originally the substitute for the minuet in large instrumental compositions, sonatas and symphonies and other things. And, most scherzi have a simple ABA form, but Chopin's are really kind of amazing, and some of them are quite creepy. These are like minor key scherzi, they're wonderful, alarming pieces full of poetic feeling. They're almost like tone poems, the scherzi. And so I think that, again, Chopin, he doesn't often get credit because his music is just so lovable and everybody plays it, and it's just taken for granted. But, what an original and inventive genius he was, and nowhere more so than in the 4 Scherzi. And for the Scherzi, I have Rubinstein. See, I had to pick Rubinstein for something, right? But this disc of the Scherzos and the Ballades was really, really marvelous. This is a CD. Originally on disc they were separate, the Ballades and then the Scherzos. But they're together on CD, so you'll get Ballades. And one of the things about these recommendations, duplication is unavoidable. Completely unavoidable. And that's okay, because it's actually nice to get different. Nobody benefits from different interpretive viewpoints more than Chopin does, because the music positively invites it. So I pick Rubinstein for the Scherzos. They are wonderful, wonderful performances. And like all the sort of mature Rubinstein Chopin recordings, what they're sort of known for and remarkable for is just the incredible naturalness that Rubinstein brings to the music. Earlier in his hot virtuoso days, he was much more interventionist than he later became. But in these late pieces, he just sublimates the music, and it comes out of him as if it was always meant to sound that way. And the Scherzos are a wonderful example of that, I think, of Rubinstein's art. And also virtuosity, because, we tend to prefer him in like Mazurkas and things that are less flashy, but he had the chops. He always had the chops. And the Scherzos show that very, very well. So, Rubinstein for the Scherzos. And now the Ballades. Oh, the Ballades. Oh, God. They're so wonderful. Of course, the most popular, famous ones are numbers 1 and 4, but 2 and 3 are not exactly chopped liver either, and I recommend them quite strongly. I have to tell you a little story about the 4th Ballade. The 4th Ballade is a famous, famous piece because, Chopin is, of course, virtuosic. Virtuosity is inherent in what he did, but by today's standards, his music is not crazy difficult. Most pianists feel they can get it easily under their fingers. And of course, it's so well written for the instrument that it always sounds impressive. It really does, whether you're aware of the flash and glitter or not. Except the 4th Ballade. The last couple pages of the 4th Ballade are notorious as being almost physically impossible to actually play. It is such difficult music. It's very, very funny to hear. And I had a friend who was an excellent pianist, and she was learning the 4th Ballade. And she asked me to come listen to her play it. And I said, sure. And I whipped out my text and I whizzed over to her studio. And she plays very, very beautifully. And she played the fourth Ballade. But I was listening to it, and she did, it was sort of a conventional Chopin performance, with all the usual rubato and whatnot. And I said to her, I want you to play it exactly as it's written on the page and in perfect rhythm. I said, when you finally, get into it and develop your interpretation, you'll be much more free. But for now, I said for me, because I'm just curious, when you hear Chopin recordings, they're always so pulled about one way or another because it's part of the style. And I said, I just want to hear it in rhythm, the way Chopin wrote it, in perfect rhythm, with everything exactly within the bar line. I said, I know it's going to be atrocious artistically, but that's how I want to hear it. I'm just curious to know what the music sounds like. She couldn't do it. It's so interesting. It doesn't work. It was so much more difficult to actually play it the way Chopin wrote it. Why? Because the tendency of all artists, and the smart ones particularly, is to slow down over the hard bits and speed up over the fast bits, but to make it sound intentional. You're not supposed to know that they're slowing down or taking a break here and there, because the music is stressing them out. It's supposed to all sound like that's what they were intending to do, and that's what Chopin really wrote. But if you have to really sit down and play it the way he wrote it, it is so much more difficult than the way it's usually performed by people. It was such a wonderful experience. I was so grateful for the opportunity to hear it that way. And she said to me, we were talking about this, that, you really do have to know it the way it's actually written before you put your own interpretive gloss on it. But most pianists, they begin with the interpretive gloss. You know what I mean? They assume it's just their right to do it that way, and that it's idiomatic, and that's the style, so that's what they can do. But the truth of the matter is, if you really know the music, you have to know it the way it was composed, and then build from there. And it was a wonderful musical experience for me, and I hope it helped her in developing her interpretation. It was such a wonderful afternoon we spent together. I remember it fondly to this day. And in the Ballades, I chose Christian Zimmermann. Now, Zimmermann is, of course, kind of a piano wacko. He runs around with his own piano mechanism in a suitcase, and he's a fuss budget, doesn't make many recordings, and he's become much more fuss budgety lately. Like his two recordings of the Chopin piano concertos, which are either the most amazing Chopin orchestral recordings that have ever been made, or the most affected and mannered Chopin recordings that have ever been made. Each note was rehearsed separately. There are a lot of artists who are sort of doing that now, like Scherzos. He's another one. They just they work the music to death. And Zimmermann is sort of one of those, or he's become one of those. I don't know. I hope not. I mean, the jury is still out, because I really like those concertos. We'll talk about them when we get to the concerto disc, the concerto video at some point. But in the Ballades, I think he is absolutely beautiful, poetic, fresh, free, gorgeous of tone, sensitive in every possible way. Some people have thought that these performances are a mite too affected, shall we say, but I don't think so. I think it all stays within the bounds of good taste and really scrupulous pianism. And you also get the barcarolle, the fabulous barcarolle in F sharp major, and the fantasy in F minor. And the fantasy, I mean, that's one of Chopin's major works. I mean, it's as important as the sonatas, but I'm not talking about it separately because, it's tucked into so many other Chopin recordings. You're going to wind up getting it anyway, and this is a great version of the fantasy. So I make an exception to my usual rules of different pianists for the barcarolle and the fantasy. I mean, you can spread them out if you want and consider them separately. But Zimmermann in the Ballades, and now we have the Impromptus. Nobody ever pays attention to the Impromptus. The Impromptus have a reputation as being sort of like highfalutin salon music. is what you might call them, not major Chopin, kind of just light and diverting and not terribly serious. And as I've always said, there is nothing wrong with that. Nothing. Lightness, divertingness. I mean, what that's what music is for. God damn it, most of the time it's actually what we need. We can't all spend our time listening to Chris Log and Todesbonden or something like that. I mean, it can't all be misery and death. Anyway, for the Impromptus, this has always been my favorite recording. It's just my favorite recording. I think it's gorgeous. Marie Pariah. Again, he hasn't really, he had more of a reputation as a Chopin pianist earlier on in his career. Of course, now he's just running around doing Bach, and his Chopin has sort of been forgotten in the great shuffle of Chopin pianists because, if everyone's doing it all the time, even great versions, they tend to get buried in the pile of newcomers and the vast inertia of all of the older versions. But Pariah's Impromptus is really a great set of the Impromptus. And you also get the barcarolle. It's on here too, so you can have another barcarolle if boat music is what gets you. You want to have the waves gently lapping at your gondola. You can have a barcarolle or two. And the berceuse is on here, which is very pretty, and which, again, there's another piece. It's one of those singleton pieces. And you get, look, the Fantasy in F minor, just so you can compare these to Christian Zimmermann while having the Ballades on one hand and the Impromptus on the other hand. I actually think these are two ideal records to get because you get those other pieces and you'll have, a nice ability to make comparisons. I mean, of course, Moravec did some of these. You're going to wind up with so much duplication when you collect Chopin. And finally, we're going to take on the Nocturnes. Now, the Nocturnes, as some of you may know, as a medium, the Nocturne was invented by John Field, the Irish pianist who was resident in Russia for much of his career, and his Nocturnes are quite lovely. But of course, Chopin raised the form to an entirely new level of poetry and musical substance. And the Nocturnes are glorious, and the obvious choice for me would have been Moravec, because that was one of the great, great, great things that Moravec did, the Chopin Nocturnes. And they were last on Nonsuch, and they're on Superfun. They've been floating around. They're out there. They're not hard to find. However, there is, of course, another set of Nocturnes that is equally acclaimed, just as much a reference version, and that is Claudio Arrau. Now, Arrau is the perfect guy for the Chopin Nocturnes. Why? Because, like Moravec, he had the most magnificent tone and touch, and the Nocturnes are all about tone and touch. But Arrau was also a Beethoven guy. He was a form and structure guy. He cared about large-scale formal organization, and he was able to get that large-scale formal organization into his fingers. They didn't look like that. They didn't look like this. This is typical pianist fingers. Yes, exactly. It looks like Cousin It, No, I mean, he got the form into his mind and brain and projected it in terms of glorious piano tone, a deep, dark, velvety, succulent, yummy, sensual tone. It's just marvelous. So these are now on Decca. They were on Philips, of course, but they are also easily available. And for your Chopin Nocturnes, you cannot do better than Claudio Arrau. There have, of course, been many other versions since, but those are quite extraordinary. And so we have the ideal list of Chopin piano music. And I'm so happy that I was able to do this because, this is my first Chopin video. I haven't had a chance to do any others yet. There will be many more, I hope. And I so wanted to talk about this music. And I think the ideal list sort of format is a great way to get started, to get the conversation going with all of you, and to introduce you to Chopin's music for listeners or viewers who don't have much Chopin yet, who are looking to start your collections, looking to know who the great pianists are. I mean, some of you I know have complained that this idea of doing a different pianist for each work or group of works is kind of irritating and not necessary. And it isn't necessary. It is, but I do it for a reason. I mean, remember, I'm the professional here in the room. I'm the pedagogue in a way, and what I'm trying to do isn't just give you, the best or the finest versions of the music in question, or a list, as I always say, which has no weak links. I also want to introduce you to the artists. I want you to know who the pianists are, and so by taking a different pianist for each group of works, you get to know a dozen or more great pianists whose work you can usually trust. If you like them, if you see they've done other things, you know that you can trust them in that composer or in that area of the repertoire, and it helps guide you, I think, in building a collection in just a sensible and not too complicated way, because there's just so much stuff out there. And in Chopin particularly, I mean, every pianist in the universe has done tons and tons and tons of Chopin. So here are some of the greatest ever recordings of Chopin's works by some of the greatest ever Chopin pianists. And now you know who they are. So thank you for viewing me, watching me yap about this stuff. Keep on listening. Take care.